Hello, everybody. We are very happy to have you today. I'm Christine Lloyd. I'm the marketing director at KNAV at the Atlanta office. Today, the webinar, as you can see, is what to expect from the Biden administration and how it will impact corporate investment strategy for the next 3 years. We have today 4 guests and speakers who are going to help you go through the maze and try to answer that question. Our moderator today is Samir Kapadia. Samir is principal and COO at the Vogel Group. He has spent over a decade in policymaking and consulting in Washington, D.C., in New York and Mumbai. Samir helps some of the largest companies in the world understand how Washington can create risk or drive business growth. Over the past 3 years, he has advised on $1.2 billion in foreign direct investment and generating nearly $75 million in incentives for manufacturers. At the Vogel Group, Samir leads the firm's trade practice, advising clients on issues relating to tariffs, supply chain, and strategy. Before that, he worked with Congressman Frank Wolf, Republican congressman in Virginia, and Senator Mark Warner, also in Virginia. In 2019 and 2020, Samir was ranked as the top lobbyist on tariff issues in Washington, D.C., based on the volume of cases before Congress, federal agencies, and the White House. Samir lives in Washington, D.C., close to the action, and he knows what he's talking about. About the technical of the webinar, I'm sure it's not your first Zoom webinar. Just keep in mind that you can ask questions, use the chat box or the Q&A, and we'll answer your questions at the end. Thank you very much for joining the webinar today. Samir, please.
Great. Thank you so much, Christine. And it's a pleasure to have everyone join us during these times, especially to talk about the U.S.-India relationship. We're very, very pleased to have an excellent panel to talk about trade, tax, investment, but in addition, how companies are looking at M&A in the U.S. market, and also where is the U.S.-India relationship during these very tumultuous times. Just by way of background, I'll introduce a few panel members that we have today. First and foremost, we have Mr. Sukant Gupta, who's the head of Americas for the Motherson Group, which is a $13 billion Indian conglomerate with a vast global presence, including a major one in the United States. Mr. Gupta joined Motherson in 1997 and has been with the group for over 23 years and has a large purview over the company's strategy when it comes to increasing shareholder value in the United States. So we're very excited to have him join us from Houston, Texas, where he's based. And not to mention, he is on the board of all of the Motherson entities in the Americas. So really pleased to have Sukant join us. In addition, very honored to have Alexander Slater, Deputy Managing Director and Financial Services of Real Estate in Tax over at the U.S.-India Business Council. Alexander is, without question, one of the authorities in Washington when it comes to the U.S.-India relationship, and he plays a critical role in government and within the corporate community here. Some of his previous tenure includes being an advisor and speechwriter to the president of the World Bank, a senior financial officer in the World Bank Treasury, and also he's a legal professional to boot, having a JD from Harvard Law and also a BA from Yale University. And in addition, he spent some time at Oxford. So we're very pleased to have him and his vast intelligence come to the table to talk about these issues. And also I'm joined by a dear friend from a dear colleague of an institution, KNAV. We have Shishir Lagu, who's a partner in international tax advisory and regulatory services at KNAV. They do incredible work globally when it comes to enriching corporate perspectives around tax issues and accounting issues and regulatory navigating. And Shishir is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He's a certified public accountant and has a vast experience in this space I really look forward to hearing him speak. Let me kick us off by talking a bit about trade, investment, and really how the Biden administration is going to be thinking about how companies can operate in the United States. Now, everyone had said that when President Biden would take office, that it would be a dramatic change from Donald Trump. That turned out to be a great fallacy, not true at all. In fact, President Biden has probably maintained a sheer majority of the policies that President Trump had regarding trade. Now, just to back up a bit, President Trump had a few key trade policies. There was Section 232 policy, which had to do about curbing the imports of aluminum and steel into the country and imposing a tariff. In some countries, there was a quota system. In addition, the elephant in the room was the Section 301 tariffs, which were the tariffs that were imposed upon China. Now, everyone had believed, even back then, that President Trump had put into place these tariffs as a means to get China to purchase more goods from the United States, because he felt that there was a very large trade gap between the countries. And there's a lot of truth in that. There is a large trade gap. After all, China is known to be a manufacturing economy. We're in a different situation. We manufacture, we have a service economy, and we have more of an advanced sort of approach to bringing products to market globally in so many words. That was never the barometer for managing that relationship. But President Trump felt differently and imposed these tariffs on $500 billion worth of imports from China. And he actually pared that down to about 350 as a means of negotiating around increasing Chinese purchases of farmed goods and other manufactured goods. And this consummated in the sort of phase one deal, which was the marquee of the Trump administration. Now, interestingly, after the president lost the election, and even during the lame duck period, we didn't know what the state of that relationship would be and whether or not it would be efficacious in terms of seeing more U.S. exports. Now, on the ends of the spectrum, we did see some movement there, and some could say that the Chinese made good on that phase one deal, irrespective of COVID, although COVID was a major supply shock in the whole system. But all in all, the consensus in Washington was, even if the Chinese didn't make their numbers legitimately, they would say through some math that they made them legitimately. So the Biden administration came into these past few months knowing very well that there needed to be some negotiation around that existing agreement that they had. And in fact, that they would keep the tariffs in place and not roll them back as a means to keep China accountable. Now, the president wants to see a lot out of China. He wants to see them come to the table on human rights issues, on forced labor issues, Hong Kong autonomy, currency manipulation. Let's not forget environmental policy, climate change. There's a lot that the president wants China to come to the table on. And Tony Blinken, who's the Secretary of State, has told the president that tariffs were the biggest gift that Trump ever gave you, because now you can keep them accountable and slowly roll them back as they come to the table. Now, who are the people in charge? You have Catherine Tai, who's the USTR, United States Trade Representative, who speaks fluent Mandarin, who has spent decades on Capitol Hill negotiating deals like the USMCA deal, which you saw consummate under the Trump administration, which was a bipartisan deal, an incredibly difficult deal to do. And Catherine Tai got it done in her capacity as the chief trade counsel in the House Ways and Means Committee. And people gave her credit for that. Trump jammed a lot of policy down people's throats. And the only deal, you could argue, that was bipartisan and therefore being the most difficult was USMCA. And Catherine Tai got that done. So she had a lot of credibility coming into this office, which she just took over the past 3 or 4 weeks. Then you have Gina Raimondo, who's the Secretary of Commerce. She's a former governor of Rhode Island and frankly has a history of supporting domestic industry, particularly within industrial manufacturing. In fact, there's an old anecdote about her past where she came from a town in Rhode Island where her father was working at a factory, and one day that factory turned off its lights because it got moved to another country. We saw globalization take full effect with this Bulova watch factory, and her father lost her job, and the family went through some financial hardship. And she acknowledges that time in her life as a point where she realized we need to prop up domestic industry. So you have Catherine Tai, who's going to be very aggressive on China and continue to keep them accountable at the request of the president. And you have Gina Raimondo, who's running commerce, who believes that we need to support domestic industry. So what does this make you gather? That the United States will continue to support domestic industry and maintain protectionist policies that will have a lot of the same tools that we've seen under the Trump administration, tariffs being one of them. And I don't believe that timeline will change. In fact, when you look at the global economy and you see how countries are coping with stimulus and affording all of these sort of black swan issues that come with this loss in tax revenue, tariff policies are great because they shore up the economy, they shore up revenue, and they make the government budget more rational. So I think that there's an impetus there to also offset some of these costs from all of these stimulus programs and bailout programs, because simply we've been in a calamity over this past year. Now, that doesn't really meet the whole nut, right? I mean, now everyone's expecting in the United States, and I'll let my good friend Shishir talk about this, that we could see some massive change in tax policy, whether it's personal income tax or corporate tax rates. And that's really going to be the deciding factor here into how companies can look at the U.S. market in terms of favorability. But let's forget about the headwinds and talk about the tailwinds and why I think the United States for global companies is still a very ripe market to participate in. And really has to do with a few factors. One is the global economy is in a bit of a rut. If you look around the world, whether it's in Asia or Europe or Africa or South America, I still think that writ large, the United States, whether it's the growth in capital markets, the presumed growth in real markets through stimulus and through sort of new QE type measures from the Fed, and the social safety net programs that are going to come with some of these new packages coming from Capitol Hill, the United States has such an excellent runway for growth. And in fact, there are 6 critical industries that I think companies should be looking at based on what we're hearing and what we're knowing from Washington. Now, in March, the president signed an executive order that said we're going to review 6 industries writ large on supply chain and see how we can retool them. There's the defense industrial base, which has things like critical minerals and high technology. There's public health. So this is everything from active pharmaceutical ingredients to PPE to things in the healthcare value chain. There's information and communications like satellite technology and wireless and 5G. Energy, obviously there's going to be a massive look at restructuring the whole energy apparatus here in the United States, given where we want to go with climate change. Transportation industrial base, so port logistics, technology therein, sensors, bridges, railways, anything in that ecosystem, and then agricultural commodity supply chain. Those 6 industries, defense, health, IT, energy, transportation, ag, are going through what they call a 100-day review process through government to say, where are all of the holes in that supply chain in the United States, and where are we leaning too much on other countries? At the end of that review process, which ends on June 4th, the president is then going to roll out massive grant programs for companies that invest in those sectors. And you can be a foreign headquartered company with a domestic wholly owned subsidiary that focuses on that. In fact, we at Vogel Group manage a lot of those circumstances with foreign companies that come up here, set up a subsidiary, and then endeavor to create domestic capabilities around public health or the energy sector or transportation. And they're doing incredibly well because government is writing checks like nobody's business. The federal government right now, particularly in the healthcare sector, for obvious reasons, will be rolling out massive grant programs, incentive programs at the federal level, which traditionally we've seen at the state and local level. And if you would ask me if you want to start a factory in the United States right now, I would tell you North Carolina, Kentucky, Texas, anywhere in the southeastern corridor would be really great, given the low tax rates, given the low utility rates, given the incentives available for production and for job creation. So to sum up, you have this amazing time right now where the United States feels very worried about imports because they want to create economic activity here, that they're keeping all these barriers to entry up. So anyone who's putting money to work here and creating jobs here, they'll give you money to do it. And it's just a fascinating time. And when I look around the world right now, I'm not seeing any other market that is that exciting. So that's the high level on trade and investment policy. We could talk for hours, but we won't. We'll save your day. But I'd love to introduce my colleague Shishir to talk a little bit about the tax environment, because I think he has some excellent insights there. Shishir, I'll give you the floor.
Thanks, Samir. So I guess I will just start by taking a cue from what you said, that the whole Made in America tax plan, the way it looks like, is kind of penalizing the offshoring and incentivizing the onshoring of the jobs, the investments, and the profits. So that looks like a broad theme of this entire program. Coming on to the tax, and the important point you made was with respect to the tax rates, and the whole world, especially with the presence in the US, are looking at these tax rates. The proposal is to increase this tax rate from 21% to 28%. So that's almost like a 33% increase in the federal tax rate. But at the same time, one must remember that the whole objective of increase in taxes is to fund the 2.3 or 2.5 trillion dollars of infrastructure projects which President Biden is kind of planning. With that in mind, and also the fact that we have state taxes in addition to the federal. So if we add about 5 or 6% of the average state tax on 28%, we are again looking at a tax rate which is 30% plus in the years to come, which in the overall global scheme is still high. So if we just look at some of the statistics, so Tax Foundation is one institute who has been since 2014 looking at the international tax competitiveness rates. And in 2014, when the US tax rate was about 34-35% at a federal level plus the state rates, US was about 28 out of the 36 countries which it was kind of evaluating. And 2017, end of 2017, when Tax Cuts and Jobs Act came and the rate was slashed down to 21%, the index kind of US suddenly improved, and they were 20th rank. Now with this again increase in the tax rate, it is expected that US will again fall back in terms of that index, and it may move to almost 33rd position out of the 36 countries. So having said that, I mean, this tax rate increase is going to have a significant impact in terms of the corporate tax policies, and it is definitely looking at reducing the US competitiveness as far as tax is concerned. Having said that, it's not just about the tax rate. There are some other provisions within the Made in America tax plan, which is also concerning the lot of corporations, especially the US outbound corporations. So some of the examples are the changes which are being proposed to the GILTI rules, country by country reporting, increasing the tax rate from 10.5% to 21%. All this is going to have an impact, as if the CFCs are being subject to tax in the US. So you have participation exemption on one side, but through GILTI, you are effectively taxing the profits of the foreign country in the US. Secondly, the minimum tax. We have always read the reports that a lot of US tech companies reports billion and billion dollars of profits to its investors, but don't really contribute much to the IRS in terms of taxes. To curb this, the Biden administration is looking at something like a minimum tax of 15% for the companies whose book incomes are beyond $2 billion, but those are not really paying any taxes in the US. So again, it definitely is an impact for US outbound corporations. Similarly, anti-inversion rules. So strengthening the inversion rules, because the way the tax regime is looking like now, the companies may think of inverting the structures, doing an inversion. So to curb that, those rules are becoming more and more stricter, or proposed to be made more and more stricter, whereby even if US shareholders are owning more than 50% of that foreign acquiring company, or if important concept, because it was not there, it was always about shareholding, but now they have moved to control and management. So if the control and management of that foreign company is happening from the US, the foreign company will still be treated as a US corporate. So it will be treated as if it's a US company, and the taxation will apply to it on the same basis. So as far as US outbound structures are concerned, we are definitely seeing a lot of unfavorable tax positions which are coming in and which are going to impact these companies in the short and the midterm. Uh, the another important aspect is with respect to the global minimum tax. That is something which a lot of OECD countries and the G20 countries have been considering, contemplating, debating, discussing for quite some time now. But Trump administration very clearly had opposed this. It was never in favor of that, but that has changed now. Uh, President Biden, in his tax plan, has extended the support to have, or in fact has initiated to have this kind of a global minimum tax plan to bring in US on an equal footing or equal competitive edge as the other countries. Having said that, what this global minimum tax is going to do is, if the US company has profits in the low tax, no tax kind of jurisdictions, it is going to tax in the US on those residual profits. So that's a global minimum tax for you. Now, what are the challenges with this global minimum tax? Number one is the tax rate itself. So what US has gone ahead and said that, okay, we would want to have a global minimum tax rate of 21%, but now that's extremely high. It's much higher than what a lot of European countries have at this point in time. So it needs to be looked at in terms of, what rate the consensus is reached upon. OECD, from what I last hear, was contemplating around 12.5%, which is coincidentally rate what the corporate tax rate in Ireland. The second question would be when? When would it happen? When the consensus would reach? So it's obviously difficult to have the negotiation between 139 countries in OECD coming to a deal in a short period of time, but the aggressive expectation is to come to a consensus by mid of this year. Let's see what happens. Whilst we discussed a lot of unfavorable positions, I started saying that there is an incentive to start business in the US. And Samir also made the similar point that the whole plan is, the whole thrust is to have the investments, have the jobs creations within the US. So whilst no clear guidance has really come in terms of what tax incentives, what tax credits will be offered to the businesses, but definitely a feel is that there would be good opportunities, good tax benefits coming way if you decide to invest and actually do the operations within the US. So it may not be a bad time really to actually start the business, not just look at the US entity as a contracting entity and do the whole execution of the work from outside of the US, but rather to do the business within the US itself. So yeah, I mean, it's a wait and watch. I mean, we are in the very nascent stage of this tax policy. Next 6 to 8 months are going to be extremely critical. We have already started discussions with the clients. So a couple of large clients have already approached us saying that, okay, let's model in terms of what this means to us in terms of our numbers in next year or so. So we are like, okay, there is so much uncertainty, but there is so much investor relations pressure. In terms of these large companies, they are viewing these impacts very closely. So all eyes glued to these changes. Let's see what happens. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Shishir. I think that was on point. Definitely an exciting time and a lot to discuss. And with that, I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. Sukant Gupta, who's the head of the Chairman's Office Americas for Motherson Group. I've given his background, but I'd love for him to briefly tell a little bit about what he does. And in addition, Sukant, Motherson has gone through so many amazing moments in its history. And as I understand, you guys have an announcement that you made last year about your new 5-year plan, and would love to have you sort of open the table, tell us about Motherson and tell us about the 5-year plan.
Yeah, so thanks, Samir. I am Sukant Gupta. I am head of Chairman's Office Americas for Motherson. My primary responsibility is to drive growth in the Americas region, representing the shareholders of Motherson. I have been with the company about 24 years in different roles around the globe. Been in the US about 7 years, based out of Houston, Texas. And Samir briefly talked about our 5-year plan. Motherson does plan in 5-year blocks. So our next 5-year plan, which ends in 2025, is to be a $36 billion company with a 40% ROS. And there are other strategies of 3CX10, which is no country customer component being more than 10% of our revenue. And we've also said that we'd like 25% of this 36 billion to come from non-automotive. So the verticals of aerospace, healthcare, medical, IT, etc., will be contributing significantly to this next 5-year plan.
Excellent. Thank you, Sukant. And just so for everyone's situational awareness, when you talk about the breadth of Motherson and how the company started, it obviously had its inception in India and slowly grew by acquisition and through joint venture globally around the world. Tell us a little bit about that story and where you guys are right now.
So Motherson has a top line of about $10 billion. We have a presence in 41 countries. With about 272 plants employing 150,000 people globally. We have about 10 verticals, through which we're driving growth. The story is very interesting. Our chairman and his mother started the company really in 1975. That's why it's called Motherson. And the son is the current chairman, so he's really built this company up from scratch. To get to about $10 billion with a global presence, of course, now in most countries where automotive is there.
Fantastic. And Sukant, one of your purviews as head of the chairman's office in Americas obviously has to do with mergers and acquisitions and strategic growth. How do you look, how does that decision matrix really look like for you? And do you think that's evolved over time, particularly under the new administration or new tax policy? How do you really look at M&A today?
So, see, like I said, Motherson has a presence in 41 countries, and we have 10 different verticals. We set our 5-year goals. I already explained the 5-year goal. 2025 is to be a $36 billion company. That really is coming, bottom up from the different verticals that we have. The major consideration for us is really to focus on the customer need. So we're really focusing on what our customers want. Really, it's important for us to understand what their problems and challenges are, and then we're looking to find solutions for that. So if a customer were to tell us that go set up a greenfield facility or to go acquire a particular entity, we would consider that deeply. And there are other considerations behind that, of course, of market share and geographical or product diversification, ROS, etc. And like I said, we've in our plan said $36 billion. We've said 3CX10, which is no customer component or country more than 10% of our revenue, and also said that 25% of this will come from non-automotive. So there's a lot of focus on aerospace, healthcare, IT, etc., these other verticals besides automotive.
It's very exciting times for the company, especially, if you consider the fact that the company does $13 billion a year now, and in 5 years you want to take it to 36. It's a massive push and really an exciting time. I'm curious, Sukant, obviously the COVID-19 environment made it very challenging for a lot of businesses to operate with supply chain logistics and if you were deemed an essential business or not. And, I know that you guys have pretty substantial operations outside of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. How is COVID-19 for your U.S. factories? I'm sure a lot of global companies are thinking, when you invest so much money in a foreign country and you're catering to your customers and you might not be as familiar with the government and the programs here in the United States and the rules. When COVID happened, and you guys have been in the United States for quite some time now, but how did you guys manage through that and how did that really work?
So, see, of course, when COVID happened in the early months of 2020, there was obviously a lot of uncertainty. I mean, nobody knew what the treatments could be, when it's going to end. It was clearly an extremely uncertain period, and I'm sure a lot of other companies, we were also trying to conserve cash and really survive for the longest period of time. Of course, there was government support available. It wasn't entirely clear, the government support was grants or loans or whatever, but there was clear mandate to, maintain employment and preserve payroll. And that's what, we were focused on, trying to do exactly that. Of course, there was lack of preparedness when this happened. So, this whole thing was unraveling, and of course we had access to the whole globe because we have presence in other countries, and we could take cue from what was happening in China because it happened there first, and a lot of these solutions in terms of hand sanitization, cleanliness, social distancing, so all of that we could take cue from that and prepare ourselves in especially the Americas, to prepare for this and managing through this pandemic.
Thanks, Sukant. And I think you bring up a good perspective there. I mean, Motherson is located, has 270 facilities in 42 countries around the world. And so I think your company probably saw and internalized and reacted to COVID in ways that other companies who maybe are in one or two countries, it just had a different scenario, and you kind of saw the whole field in terms of how countries were responding. And I'm curious, do you think that the United States is, or even Mexico or Canada, since your purview is the Americas, have bounced back relatively quicker than some of the other global markets where you guys have a presence?
And so we started seeing recovery, first in China. I mean, of course, the recovery was coming very strong. And now, with the uncertainty reducing, of course, whenever we think we're getting to stabilization, we get to a situation like what's happening in India right now with the second wave, right? So the unpredictability remains. Still, we know that the vaccines are working, and some of the sectors have bounced back faster than the others. Automotive has rebounded fairly strongly. So the Americas is strong for us. Automotive has really rebounded strongly, and there's greater predictability clearly at this time.
I want to spend the last few minutes or so talking about the M&A process and how you feel companies kind of go through that in an effective way in today's environment. From what we're hearing from our friends on Wall Street and friends in the corporate community is that one of the major challenges around consummating mergers and acquisitions during COVID was valuation, that it was very difficult to pin down a number on a company's value because of the massive amount of uncertainty about economic rebound, about future policy, about government programs, about even market concentration and shifts, potential bankruptcies. There was just a lot of uncertainty, and we didn't see many deals, not because there wasn't capital, but because no one could just agree to a number. Curious if you find that to also be something as a professional you see as an issue, and if not, why do you think that is? And curious about your perspective on valuation in today's economic climate.
So, of course, like you rightly said, there was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of government support, and clearly valuations were a challenge. That still continues. Traditionally, we've used historical financial statements to value a company. However, in this case with COVID, clearly the historical financial statements not really a very good reference. We've tried to, of course, using forecasts and future projections, but again, that comes with a lot of underlying assumptions and different scenarios, and with the current situation is challenging. What we've tried to do is be creative with structuring deals, maybe look at earn-outs and maybe using convertible debt instead of straight equity, etc. So you just have to be a little bit more creative. Valuations are challenging, and but the opportunities are increasing. And so if you're willing to be creative, then deals can be done.
Understood. And the last question I have is, and obviously me being a product of Washington, D.C., I have to ask it. Do you think that the Biden administration or the current administration has changed your perspective on growth in the United States? For instance, if Trump would have stayed in office, would that have made a difference? Now that Biden's in office, does that make a difference? And the reason why I ask is, obviously during the Trump administration, we had the USMCA policy that came about, which was really great for domestic auto parts manufacturers because it increased the rules of origin provisions in domestic automobiles from, I think it was some 63% to 68%. Something that basically said that if you want to make a car in the United States, following this agreement, more of those components need to come from the Americas. And that benefited domestic manufacturers and less so the folks that export into this country or into the region. Do you think that there could be potential other policies from the Biden administration that you're looking forward to, or anything you could tell the Biden administration to say, you know what, we would love if you did this because it would help my business a lot? Any asks of the Biden administration?
So, Samir, as a company, we take a really long-term view, and we're focused on increasing our footprint, our presence in the United States. We've invested heavily in the U.S. We have 5 manufacturing facilities and a network of engineering offices, marketing offices, and so on. We believe in being globally local, so being close to our customers. With the tariffs and Buy America requirements and things like that, we're very well placed actually to take advantage of that and looking to make further investments. If the proposed infrastructure bill goes forward, there would be opportunities on electrification. Electrification has certain requirements for lightweighted components, strong materials, etc. And Motherson has access to technologies, and we have the ability to provide that to the auto manufacturers. So we think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity, and I think the stimulus is going to continue in some way, for shape or form. So there's going to be disposable income that's going to continue to drive volume. So we think we're fairly well placed to take advantage of this current administration's policies.
Wonderful. Well, Sukant, thank you as always for spending time and speaking with this audience about the Motherson story. It's an amazing story and such a even brighter future ahead with these ambitions and with your leadership. I'm very confident that you'll get there. Thank you again, Sukant.
Thank you.
I'd now like to turn it over to Alexander Slater from the U.S.-India Business Council. I mean, Alexander, this has been a very, very sobering moment for India and the world to see these changes in COVID numbers, and just as a leader in the U.S.-India space, I'd love to just give you the floor and tell us what's going on, and we'd love to kind of learn from you what the current situation is. Alexander, I'll give you the floor.
Thanks so much, Samir. I really appreciate it. Listen, it's a real pleasure and honor to be here today with Sukant, Shishir, and yourself. I'm grateful to KNAV and the Vogel group for bringing us together today. You guys are real leaders in this space and on the relationships. So we really appreciate all the work you guys are doing to help advance U.S.-India ties in the commercial space and in the strategic space. It's especially nice to be here with a company like Motherson because they really do epitomize sort of the specialness of what's going on in the corridor right now. A lot of us think of it as, at least I think, if you're in DC, thinking about how can U.S. companies really make a name for themselves in India, and what Motherson is doing in the United States really is sort of a testament to what entrepreneurial Indians have been doing for some time now, coming to the U.S., setting up shop, investing here, growing their business, and really creating jobs, helping to grow the economy. Less people discount that. The U.S. market is probably the most competitive market in the world. It's probably the hardest place to make a name for yourself as a foreign company, even if it's the largest market in the world. So the story of Motherson is really an amazing one. But to the point you were making before, Samir. It really is a tough time to be in India right now. I'm in New Delhi, which in terms of this second wave of COVID-19 has the third highest per capita number of infections. Goa and Lakshadweep have higher ones. Maharashtra, of course, has the highest overall infections in terms of when you go across states. And Karnataka has just had an explosive increase today to over 50,000 new cases per day. This is a very sad time. Some of the things that you see from a humanitarian perspective are very difficult. India has two sides to it. This is a wonderful, amazing growth story where so many people are coming out of poverty, so much capacity, a real demographic benefit coming from the fact that so many folks are young. Something like 70% of the population is 30 years or below. So there's a real democratic dividend that's going to play out over the next 20 years. At the same time, it is a sort of middle-income country and a lower middle-income country. And so some of the developmental attributes that you might associate with countries that have so much technical capacity like India aren't here. And we see that really coming out now with the stress on the healthcare system. Overall, nationally, there are about 382,000 new cases yesterday. That is likely an undercount and likely a substantial undercount in terms of COVID cases. Some experts suggest it's 10 or even 20x. But even if you go on the 10x side, that's close to 4 million new cases a day. The 7-day average is right around there, 381,000, and it topped out at 400,000 at the end of April. Now, you might say, look, this is a downward trajectory from 400,000 going down, but we also see a decline in testing. So testing is about 25% below what it was at its peak. And so it's hard to know whether these numbers suggest that we're at a crest or that they're merely a reflection of lower testing rates. When I talk to experts in terms of where this infection is heading, they think that the peak is mid to end of May, but is likely to persist for some time after that at high levels and levels that challenge the healthcare system. Some people say into July. I think that that India is right where the United States was in the December-January period. I think folks remember that was a really tough time for the U.S., where infection numbers went very, very high, into the multiple hundreds of thousands, and it was only through a massive vaccination campaign that the numbers were brought down, and that the numbers continued to decline through a combination of social distancing, mask wearing, and now the vaccination campaign. So, the focus of our efforts these days is really on promoting U.S.-India cooperation to stop the pandemic, both to kind of support India's health system here, because we see the capacity stress that it's under, but then also to kind of take steps to bring down the case counts overall. You see some of the major needs for hospitals that there's basically no beds in some places. And so they're trying to stand up new overall bed capacity. A lot of need for respiratory support, so oxygen generators, cylinders, and concentrators, because the impact of COVID on the respiratory system for severe cases is usually where the hospitalization comes from, and also ventilators. There's also a drive to bring more therapeutics to India in the form of remdesivir, which is a popularly prescribed therapeutic here, even if in some cases it may not be the cure-all. And then also ultimately on vaccines, because India has, even as it is a vaccine powerhouse, it has the largest capacity to manufacture vaccines in the world with the Serum Institute of India in Pune. The population is so huge here. We're talking 1.4 billion people, so 4 times the size of the United States, that even if you are producing 160 million vaccine doses a month, which I think is the number that the Serum Institute is producing, or at least the government of India has ordered from domestically manufactured vaccines, and it's 2 doses per vaccine, that's 70 million people a month. A full year of vaccinations maxed out at that supply, you've only gotten to half your population. So you see the size of the issue here. So what I think is going to happen is that you'll see vaccine campaigns targeted on COVID hotspot areas to ultimately bring down the case count. This being said, over the last 10 days, we've seen an incredible expansion of U.S.-India cooperation to bring this to heel. You've seen, for example, if you go, say, 2 weeks ago, some rumblings about why isn't the U.S. in the game in the Indian media, to the U.S. being the leader of any source of global assistance, both on the official level and the unofficial level. What I mean by that, I mean industry. So on the official level, it all started about 10 days ago on April 25th. It's a Sunday where National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Ajit Doval, his counterpart in India, had a phone call to talk about what needs would be and where the U.S. might be able to support. And then on Monday, April 26th, things really got going. President Biden and Prime Minister Modi spoke about U.S.-India cooperation. And then Secretary of State Tony Blinken had a meeting with a number of CEOs of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, organized. U.S. Chamber of Commerce is the parent of the organization that I'm help manage, which is the U.S.-India Business Council. And so we have played a very big role in trying to foster industry support for official cooperation. And then the first U.S. assistance landed in India on Wednesday of that week. That's April 28th. And things have really gathered pace since then. Looks like the U.S. has committed to over $100 million worth of official assistance. And today we launched the Global Task Force on Pandemic Response, which right now is focused on mobilizing for India. It's a task force of 19, led by a steering committee of 19 CEOs from some of the biggest companies in the United States: Apple, IBM, MasterCard, UPS, PepsiCo, you name it, companies from across sectors that really want to help support India at this time, and ultimately help mobilize industry support for a global pandemic response. Today, as part of one of the main initiatives of the task force, 100 ventilators will be landing in India. This is the first consignment of 1,000 ventilators, a $30 million commitment from industry to help support India. We'll also be bringing 25,000 oxygen concentrators. These are individual devices that help people breathe when their O2 levels decrease, which is a major risk factor when it comes to COVID. And so this is really going to help step up support for people who are affected by serious COVID and give them a greater chance of survival. So it really is a story where the United States, as well as other countries, is coming to support India during its time of need. And that will ultimately expand to vaccine cooperation as well. I think you saw that President Biden committed to release some of the United States stockpiles of AstraZeneca vaccine to India earlier this week. And there'll also be, I think, expanded cooperation on importing of U.S. vaccines to India very soon. India is rapidly changing its regulations that stood in the way of that. So I am hopeful that you'll see imports of Pfizer as well as J&J's vaccine soon. And J&J's vaccine, because it is a one-shot vaccine, really does have the capacity to be a game changer here. And then ultimately, I think in July, you'll see that J&J's vaccine will be manufactured domestically in India by Biological E, which will also help step up the supply for Indian vaccines. So look, I can talk a little bit more about the work that we're doing during this time. I can also talk about U.S.-India trade as a strategic and sort of perspective matter. But I thought this might actually help folks get a sense of where things are right now, what we're doing. But I'd be happy to answer questions, Samir, that you might have.
Thanks, Alexander. I really appreciate kind of on the ground what's happening. Obviously, our thoughts and prayers are for everyone in India, including you and your team and all the great work that you do. I think one of the main questions that we've seen with the overall U.S.-India relationship is, during the Trump administration, there was always some rumblings about a prospective deal with India. And, we got close sometimes and it didn't happen. We got close again, didn't happen. Do you think that the Biden administration is more sympathetic towards India in a way the Trump administration wasn't? I mean, we know the Howdy Modi event and how buddy Trump and Modi were. But in many respects, I think President Biden and Vice President Harris really understand India in ways that maybe Trump didn't. I'm curious, what's your overall perspective there? Do you think outside of COVID that there's some window here for a larger cooperation?
Yes. Look, I think, and a short answer, yes. And I think that you'll see rapid acceleration of U.S.-India ties. Now, look, let's give the Trump administration its due. They really did, in the last 2 years especially, And I think as an effort during the pandemic, you really saw this because of some of the things that were becoming up as issues in the election campaign, that there was a real acceleration of strategic ties towards India. You saw this through greater priority on Quad meetings, where you had senior officials from the US and India getting together with counterparts in Japan and Australia to elevate the nature of that partnership in the Indo-Pacific. You had joint military exercises for the first time between the navies of the four countries. You also saw the sign of three foundational defense, or the third of three foundational defense agreements between the U.S. and India, all of which suggest that during the Trump administration, even as the leaders did project this very buddy-buddy relationship, much deeper down within the governments, there was an acceleration of ties. And you're seeing that with the Biden administration, right? They took the Quad to a whole nother level in March with the first ever meeting of the four countries' leaders, and giving this sort of talking arrangement some structure and some policy chops when they started the three working groups on sort of healthcare, which is really focused on pandemic response, technology, and climate change. So those three work streams are advancing the four countries' cooperation on an ongoing basis, and I think you'll see these summits as opportunities to announce major progress on those deals. And that's a big deal because it takes the Quad again out of this ad hoc arrangement into something that has an institutional structure and an ongoing workflow. And I think that again is a product of the Biden administration building on good work that the Trump administration did in this area. You'll also see it at this acceleration at the secretarial level. So Lloyd Austin came to India at the same time that the defense secretary, at the same time that Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor and secretary of state, were meeting with their Chinese counterparts. That was an express, highly choreographed event. It was meant to send a message to India that even though we're talking to China, you are a very top priority to us as a strategic matter. Samir, you talked earlier about Catherine Tai and Gina Raimondo, the U.S. Trade Representative and the Secretary of Commerce. Both have spoken with their counterpart, Piyush Goyal, who is the Minister of Commerce and Railways and a very influential minister here. And those conversations have gone exceptionally well. Catherine Tai, after the conversation, called the U.S.-India relationship a strategic one. So she gets that trade plays a very important role in that, even as the prior administration was unable to seal a trade deal initially. I do think that we will see a lot of investment of resources between the two countries to get to a trade agreement. That's for sure. I can't make a prediction on the outcome. I do think that there are areas of agreement that were reached during this mini trade deal, but for a number of reasons that both sides will tell you, they had different answers for why it didn't come to fruition. But I do think that we can definitely build upon that for a larger deal. And Piyush Goyal has said that he wants a larger deal. So if you take his comments and you take Catherine Tai's comments about it being a strategic relationship, you see Biden and Modi have already spoken twice. Once with an introductory call. I would say actually 4 times, an introductory call. Then you had the leaders meeting on climate, which was about 2 weeks ago. You also had this Quad leaders meeting, and then you had the Biden-Modi conversation about the pandemic last week. That's a lot, right? I don't think that Biden has ever has spoken to as many other leaders like this to date. Maybe Japan, but I think that this is this shows the priority that this administration puts on the relationship and where it's going. And I've just my own inside baseball is that I've heard from folks that the call between Piyush Goyal and Gina Raimondo was extremely positive, which is a really, really big deal. And I think it shows that both countries want to see this move to the next level after some explosive growth in U.S.-India trade between 2015 and 2019. And that trade maintaining its momentum. The U.S. and China are neck and neck to be India's largest trading partner, and the strategic context very much favors the United States after tension between China and India in the Northeast.
So in my last question to you, Alexander, is if you were to predict 5 years from now, which industries between cooperative partnership between the U.S. and India would be double or triple what it is now, what if you were to pick two industries, what industries would they be?
Yeah, so I would say the industry of climate change, right? And I would say the industry of digital services. Now, those are a bit of a cheat because climate change covers a whole gamut of things, whether it's renewable energy, industrial transformation, or financial services. U.S. financial services companies have made enormous commitments to invest in sustainability, and where they're going to be able to get a lot of growth for that, and where the need for that finance is greatest is India. So I think you'll see a lot of money coming in here, once the pandemic subsides. On energy, that growth is already happening, and that is part of that climate change conversation, whether it's on renewables or transitional fuels like natural gas, and then certainly on digital services. Now, digital services is a bit of a cheat too, because every company these days is a digital services company, but simply because there are so many people in India, and it's such a data-rich environment, and it's such the rate of digital adoption here is so high, and U.S. companies are really the drivers of innovation digitally. With, I should say, many Indian counterparts. I think there was a week, 2 weeks ago, where there were 5 unicorns were made in India in 1 week because of either through SPACs or other public deals, and they were all technology companies. It just goes to show you the potential that U.S. investors see in the technology sector here. So those are the two sectors. Obviously, there are subsectors in them that where I think there'll be a lot of momentum. But I also think on life sciences. I just think that the complementary nature of India's ability to manufacture vaccines and therapeutics, and the U.S.'s capacity for R&D and investment really makes that a ripe area for cooperation, provided that we can get things like intellectual property rights sorted out, and then on the digital side, that we can get data governance issues and digital taxation agreements in place.
Great. Well, I'll just throw in, I hope defense is up there too. I'm really bullish on that sector between India and the US. Well, I know we're running out of time here, and we're at time. I want to thank Alexander, Sukant, Shishir, the entire KNAV team and the Vogel group and the US India Business Council and Motherson for coming together for this webinar today. I really appreciate everyone's time. You can reach us by looking at our website and finding our email. We can comment on joint ventures, tax policy, government engagement, growth. You can always reach out to the US India Business Council as well. If you're not a member, please join them. And thank you again for your time. I'd like to turn it back over to Christine from the KNAV team for some last words, but this is Samir Kapadia. Thanks again for joining.
Thank you, everybody. It was very informative, and I hope that you enjoyed the webinar as much as I did. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and thank you, our guest. I know that we have some questions that we didn't have the time to answer, but feel free to send an email to markets@knavcpa.com, knavcpa.com, and we'll be happy to answer any additional questions that you have. Thank you very much.